Okay, people are still arriving, but in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kim Bailey with Alzheimer's Orange Counted. We're very excited about today's topic and speaker and attendance. We want to welcome you to our webinar. It's Sundowning Syndrome and Dementia. And we, as always, want to thank our wonderful speakers. We have Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, Caring Companions at Home, O'Connor Mortuary, and Alzheimer's Orange County. And as always, our sponsors are providing these webinars as a service to the community on topics that are of interest to those who are caring for, whether it's professionally or personally, caring for older adults. And we hope that you find them informative and useful. And we thank our sponsors so much. So Erin Light is with us today. She is the administrator at Silverado Senior Living in Costa Mesa. And by the way, we're welcoming a lot of guests from Silverado today, and we're really happy to have all of you with us. Silverado is a great partner to Alzheimer's Orange County and to the community at large. Erin is a gerontologist with over 10 years of experience in dementia care and supporting the needs of older adults. She got her bachelor's in cognitive science from UC San Diego, after which she worked in dementia research in a joint UCSD Veterans Hospital venture, researching mild cognitive impairment in older veterans. She obtained her master's degree in gerontology from USC and became the graduate researcher on a joint Silverado Senior Living USC study exploring the effects of daylight in reducing depression in memory-impaired adults. Erin also holds a residential care for the elderly administrator certification and a dementia care specialist certification. Her passion for older adults experiencing memory loss stems from supporting a grandparent with dementia in a caregiver role during her adolescent years. So Erin has extensive experience hosting support groups for various populations, including family members of individuals with memory decline, and also participates in speaking engagements on executive functioning and cognition. Erin is currently a member on the UCI Mind Community Outreach Committee. And as I mentioned earlier, we've brought her back. She did a speaking engagement for this webinar series last year on wandering, and she's back by popular demand. And I'm going to turn it over to you now, Erin. Thank you for being back with us in our series.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to spend some time with you today. Pleasure to be invited back. Thank you. And I'm going to be mindful of our time, so we are going to jump right in. All right, so our topic, as we've heard, Sundowning Syndrome and Dementia. I'm going to go through a really brief crash course on dementia. Many of you might already know this. It's just nice to review. Dementia is the umbrella term that describes the variety of diseases and conditions that cause damage to the brain. And it's not part of the normal aging process. So when I forget to put my milk back into the fridge, or I forget my keys, or what I had for breakfast yesterday, that's pretty normal. That's just our normal inability to not multitask so well. This is more progressive. This is slow. It starts with milder symptoms and gets worse over time. Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. It makes up 60 to 70% of dementias. Here's quite a few of them. There's over 120 in total. We're not going to review all of them, but there's two types of dementia, irreversible and reversible. Irreversible, as I mentioned, it's more progressive. Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body, frontotemporal dementia, Pick's disease, vascular, Parkinson's. Reversible can be recovered with medications, with treatment, or over time. So depression can bring on dementia, drug interactions, nutrition deficiencies, thyroid disease, infections. And I'll also add, it can also occur due to anesthesia and surgery. Okay, so real quick, we're going to review the changes associated with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. As we know, the most common, of course, is the loss of memory. Language and communication changes. Aphasia is very prominent in the milder stages. It comes in very early sometimes. People lose their ability to converse as well. And the loss of executive functioning, which majority of it occurs in the frontal lobe of your brain. So this includes reasoning, judgment, and abstract thought. Other changes include visual spatial perception changes as well as behavioral changes. So I want you to think of this as an organ that is damaged. So for example, when we have a lung or a heart or a liver that gets damaged, you can still communicate with the person. You get to talk to them, you get to share your emotions, and they're still there with you. Unfortunately, when dementia begins, we're actually losing a part of the person that we know the best, which is really their entity, their personality, how they interact with us. And sometimes this feels a lot more devastating, even very early in this disease process. I want to give you a quick overview of the Alzheimer's brain, part of the brain, the hippocampus, that is really associated with this loss of memory. We all know, or we've heard, it's helps to move short-term memories into long-term memories, but it does a few other things as well. It also stores declarative memories, so dates, facts, events. It also affects spatial memories, such as pathways and routes, where you are in your neighborhood, where you are in your town. It's also one of the few places that retrieves memories as well as creates new brain cells. So if you can imagine, the hippocampus starts to deteriorate a few years, sometimes 10 years or more before the first early mild symptoms of dementia come into play. And by that point, researchers have done scans and they've seen up to a 20% volume loss in the hippocampus. So all of those things are really affecting the person right up front. Okay, so with Sundowning syndrome, this is known as the group of disruptive symptoms in the middle and late stages of Alzheimer's disease and some other forms of dementias as well. It can also be a group of symptoms most associated with the later part of the day. So it's also, people may experience this state of confusion or agitation that occurs in the later afternoon. And it's also at a time when most people are expected to wind down. So you might have a little glimpse of this when we drive in the morning. We can see very clearly. When we drive in the evening, depending on how our vision is, it's pretty good. But that twilight zone, when you're heading home in traffic, it's a little blurry. So imagine that's what's happening on a very grand scale to our brains. Unfortunately, it's not really known with certainty what the underlying causes of sundowning is, but some of these theories include it could be an accumulation of sensory overload or sensory stimulation that's built up over the course of the day. It could also be results of a hormone imbalance that occurs at night, and this would affect someone's natural circadian rhythm. Another theory is the fatigue that builds up over the course of the day, just kind of maxing out our brain power at that point. And lastly, anxiety based on the inability to manage in the dark. So those changes from light to dark in that time of day can be very disorienting. And I'll share some of Silverado and USC's research on this a little bit later in the presentation. All right, so let's get into the meat of this. So these are the symptoms that are most often correlated with sundowning. So the first one, mood changes. Sometimes it feels like a switch got flipped. There's a lot of emotions. They could be crying. They might have anxiety or agitation or be aggressive. They can also be restless. They might have increased fear, and you might see quite a bit of paranoia as well. Cognitively, we look for things like visual and auditory hallucinations, delusions, disorientation of where they're at. They can also be confused about the identity of people. So this can be the inability to recognize their spouse or their children. They might be regressing 5 to 10 years in the past, and they might be thinking you're somebody else. Some of the behavioral expressions, the sudden unexplained changes, as I mentioned, like flipping a switch, inability to respond to reasoning and having some stubbornness, sleep disturbances, having difficulty at nighttime, trouble speaking and thinking clearly. Sometimes this includes hiding things, rocking, pacing, and wandering. And I just want to pause here real quick and focus on a really important word in this slide, which is inability. Sometimes we think if they just try harder, or if they just settle down, or if they just relax, they'll be able to overcome this. So I'm going to give you an example that I share with our families when we're trying to provide some education on sundowning. And I correlate this to my allergies. So a little humorous story. I am allergic to most of the world, grass, trees, horses, cats, shrimp, gluten, lactose, 15 other things, right? When I went in to go do the back scratch test, the nurse actually went and retrieved all the other clinicians in the clinic to come and look because they hadn't seen any reactions that bad, right? I would expect going in to get my allergies tested, if they see something wrong, they would tell me, here's what we're going to help you with. We might give you some medication. We might try some different treatment. Bee pollen, there's lots of different things. What they're not going to say to me is, Erin, all you have to do is just try harder. This is just your body reacting to something. All you have to do is tell your brain or tell your body to stop reacting, right? We're not going to be able to do this, and they're not able to overcome this, right? And we know this because if their brain wasn't deteriorating, we would still have the same person and their same emotions and their same actions as before. So just keep that in mind. I will be referring to dementia quite often in this presentation as brain deterioration, just to make it a little more tangible for us to think about. Okay, so some of the risk factors for sundowning. 20%, 1 out of 5, yikes, of people with Alzheimer's experience some level of sundowning behaviors, as we mentioned, more towards the middle to late stages. These risk factors include history of alcohol or substance abuse, which can exacerbate symptoms, changes in sleep patterns, lack of sleep. I can't tell you how many families come in, especially spouses, and say, Erin, I'm going to finally get some sleep now that they're with you, because they just get up. They're up at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock, and they're showering, they're getting their clothes on, they're ready for work, they're going downstairs for breakfast, and I spend an hour trying to get them back in bed by 4. By 4:30, we start this process all over again, right? So when the brain's resetting on the overnight, it becomes very confusing about what time of day it is. Other risk factors include the difficulty separating reality from dreams. This can also be difficulty separating reality from what we see. So, for example, on television, when we had those northern Los Angeles fires, we had some residents at our community who thought the fire was occurring here in Newport Beach, and they needed to get out of the community and go and get their families. And it was very troublesome for them because it really was exacerbated by their sundowning. So we changed the channel and watched something different. So if you're seeing this in the evening times or late afternoon with television, would just recommend try and stay away from some of those intense televisions, shows, or movies. It might help to keep their anxiety down quite a bit. Other risk factors include difficulty with stress from unusual events. So visiting the doctor, right? We go to the doctor, we expect them to help us, but if I know that I am starting to have mild cognitive impairment symptoms, me going to the doctor means they're going to ask me questions that are really embarrassing, like, what's my birth date? What time of day is it? What did I have for breakfast? Who's the president, right? These are all questions that occur on those cognitive tests that we give those who have MCI. And we see a lot of times where we hear from families that they just walk out. The second they hit the lobby door, or the second they get into that physician's waiting room, even 5 minutes goes by and they're ready to split. So I would recommend, if you're at home and you're having this difficulty getting them out to the physicians, try and find a mobile doctor who can make house calls. This is pretty common, especially in Orange County right now with COVID and everything that's going on. People can come to you. That way we're leaving our loved ones in our safe environment. Very similarly at Silverado, because we are purely memory care communities, it's really great because our physicians and our nurses and the care team don't wear scrubs. They don't wear lab coats. We minimize that medical imagery to make sure that we're not stressing anybody out or provoking any sundowning as well. Lastly, caregiver stress and frustration can influence their behavior. This can be very nonverbal, right? You could just be oh, you're just sighing, rolling your eyes. Somebody can tell very quickly if you're stressed out, and that's going to project onto them, which is going to make everything a little bit worse than necessary. And a lot of times this is difficult to understand why sundowning occurs. And I'll share their story. I had a friend, and her mother was experiencing very early signs, and she just couldn't understand though why all of a sudden she didn't remember what house she was in or where she was headed or the surroundings in the neighborhood. She and I were sitting outside at a Starbucks, and I said, okay, let's take a look at this. Our reality right now is we're sitting on a patio outside a Starbucks drinking frappuccinos, for example. And is that true or false? Obviously it's true. Okay, but what if that's just your reality, right? I told my friend Katie, what if that's just your reality? And actually, we are in a doctor's office, and I'm trying to convince you we're in a doctor's office, while you're looking around and you're saying, no, we're outside a coffee shop, Erin. This is not where it's at, right? So that really strong level of confusion, whatever reality they're in, is not always going to match up with where we're at today. Other triggers that can aggravate sundowning, so in the environment, lower dim lighting, increased shadows, right? A curtain blowing from an open window might think somebody's back there. In the wintertime, we hear research on the Northern Hemisphere, how the less hours in the daytime really affect people's biological rhythms and their circadian rhythms, and it increases their depression risk. Noises and distractions. This is a pretty strong one, and a lot of times can be something very familiar to us, right? Maybe grandpa's always been the head instigator for game days, for NFL Sunday, Super Bowl Sundays, and he's the one who gets all the family together and everybody sits and whoops and hollers in the living room, and all of a sudden, now that he's having this cognitive decline, it's too much. There's too much noise. He can't track conversations. He doesn't know why there's noise coming from the TV and all the family. He might be getting up, and we might be thinking, Grandpa, you're the one who wanted us all over here in the first place, right? This can also happen at holiday dinners. We see this a lot of times. Families very lovingly want to take their loved ones home for the holiday dinner, have a nice Christmas or Thanksgiving or Hanukkah dinner together. And we probably 6 or 7 times out of 10, they return back to the community within a half hour and say, well, Mom sat down for about 5 minutes and there was a lot of stuff going on, and she got up and said she wanted to go home. So we brought her back, right? So just this overwhelming stimulation that really affects us in the late afternoon. I always recommend to families, try and have a holiday dinner in the middle of the day around lunchtime when they're not at risk for sundowning. Strange noises or unfamiliar settings and surroundings. Again, if you're used to going to new restaurants in your community, here and there, outside, of course, right now, you might want to switch it from dinner time to lunchtime, just because those unfamiliar settings, especially in the evening time, are going to cause a lot more confusion. And lastly, clutter. You might not think this is a lot, but in general, clutter is a huge risk for injury and confusion. And it really makes a big difference when they're walking around the house. If they see clutter, for example, on a table, they might think some mail is some financial bills. And then they check their pocket for their wallet, and they don't have their wallet on them, and they need to go find their checkbook, and let's go to the bank, and I got to pull money out. I don't know what's going on, right? So it just kind of turns into this cycle. And also, if there's just clutter around the house, we've heard sometimes with paranoia during dementia decline that people think somebody's come in and robbed them because the house just looks really out of place. Okay, some individual level triggers that can occur: fatigue, illness, presence of an infection, such as a UTI. This could be something very easy to look for, but hard to diagnose, right? So UTI behaviors are very pronounced. It looks just a lot like regular behaviors: agitation, anxiety, wandering, pacing. but it's not that normal. And I don't know if any of you have had a UTI. I've only had one in my life. It was a pain in a place you don't want to have pain, right? So when they're starting even antibiotics for a UTI, there's still 3 or 4 good days of pain before the antibiotics start to kick in. So try and think about that, maybe adding a Tylenol or whatever your physician recommends if there is a UTI. The other thing to look for UTIs, or even pain in general, pain aggravates an individual to the point of it looking like a psych issue. Now, if we're going to add psych medications, and I'm not a clinician, but I've seen this, if we add psych medications on top of pain, all we're doing is just covering up the pain. We're just masking it. We're buffering it. We haven't fixed any of the pain, and we've given them some pretty heavy duty meds. So always check for pain first before we go to that. Additionally, poor vision. If the person doesn't see shapes clearly, they may experience visual hallucinations, very common. Changes to medication or new medication as well. Medication's wearing off later in the day. Most of us take meds in the morning, right? Or vitamins, allergy meds in my case. You might want to try and see if your physician can push back some of the meds to a little bit later in the day so it's a little more continuous and not as difficult of a change midday. Disruptions of a person's internal body clock, we talked about that, the sleep disturbances as well. Changes in the daily schedule or routine. This is a big one that maybe doesn't seem as big. If I am used to taking a nap at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I've been taking a nap for all 15 years that I've been retired, or 10 years, every day at 1 o'clock, and all of a sudden you want to take me out to the grocery store, you're throwing me off because my routine is pretty set, right? So try and maintain their regularity of what their hobbies are, their routines, and at what points of the day really makes a big difference. Additionally, another trigger on the individual level is something that reminds the person of a time when they were younger, maybe expecting a spouse or a child to come home, somebody to cook meals. Maybe they think their child's lost. And this is not the time to tell them, Mom, I'm your child. I'm 50 years old. I'm not 5 anymore, right? I'm clearly not at school. I'm right here in front of you. For those of you who are parents, and I'm not, but I've heard the level of panic that you have when you lose a child in a store is tremendous. It is not something you ever forget in your life, and something that you hope doesn't happen once, let alone twice. So if you can imagine, that level of panic is still what their brain is telling them is occurring if they feel like they've lost somebody. So please take it seriously. We want to validate their concerns. We want to tell them, for example, what would a child be doing if they're 5 or 6? They might still be at school at 4 o'clock in the morning, or maybe we let them know, oh, their friends are probably going to pick them up, right? This therapeutic retelling is what we've coined it in the industry. Okay, so it makes a big difference for them. Let's take a look at some of the dangers of sundowning. So increased likelihood of injury from falling, right? If there's increased anxiety and increased pacing, this is going to happen a lot more easily because their body is moving faster than their brain can catch up with. Increased agitation or violent behavior can result in an injury to themselves or others. I'll give you a quick example. Let's say I'm a 75-year-old woman, and 3 years ago, I broke my shoulder. So it healed, it's fine, but because of my age, it didn't heal enough, and it still aches and gives me trouble. Now I have a lovely caregiver who's come over to the house, and they're gonna help me take a shower in the afternoon. But my shoulder is really hurting today, and I know if that caregiver comes over to me and tries to help me up, it's gonna hurt. Now, I have brain deterioration. I'm in the middle of dementia, in the middle stages. I can't clearly express to her, please don't come near me. Please don't touch me right now. My shoulder really hurts. All I can do is listen to what my brain's telling me, which is if this person comes over to me and touches me, my shoulder's going to hurt. So you need to make sure they stay away. Right? So this is when we see people pushing back on care. If they're scared or frightened, or if they have pain, or if they're unsure of what's going on, if we're not talking to them and explaining what's going on, they are going to push away, just like we would do with a stranger who's trying to make us do something we don't want to do, right? Additional dangers include wandering off and becoming lost. This is extremely very common and very dangerous to occur as well. Loss of sleep, which can cause symptoms to worsen. Yes, there's a lot of research saying that older adults don't need as much sleep as younger adults. That's fine. But if you've ever been just a little too tired, or you're just, you only got 4 hours instead of your usual 6 or 7, if you're like me, I get nauseous, my head hurts, I can't think, and everybody who's talking to me that day is very much annoying me, lovingly so. It's not their fault, but I just don't feel good, right? So me trying to do anything productive that day probably isn't going to go too well. Lastly, if they're agitated, they may remove a necessary medical device. This is very, very, very common. This could be a walker. It could be an arm brace. Unfortunately, it can also be an IV in a hospital. Why am I here? What's this thing in my arm? Got to take it out. We explain to families because a lot of times residents move into communities and they haven't learned how to use a walker, right? So if there's that hippocampal damage to their brain that's not letting them input new memories, they're not going to be able to learn it. Yeah, sure, their muscle memory is going to help strengthen them. It will decrease their muscle atrophy in their legs. They'll be able to stand up easier. But walking, if I can't remember that I need a walker and I look down and say, what in the world is this? And I'm going to put it to the side and I'm going to keep walking because I'm used to walking normally, right? And this is when a lot of falls occur. So how do we prevent sundowning? Let's take a look at some of the environmental adaptations we can do that would help. We're going to try and maximize exposure to light earlier in the day to encourage some sleepiness at nighttime, right? In the afternoon, we want to reduce background noise, provide a stimulating activity that makes sense to them, uses their strengths. We might want to bring familiar items for comfort into the environment, such as their favorite jacket or a snack that they really enjoy, or even their pet. Pets are fantastic at making us feel better. We also want to remove clutter, as I mentioned. Let's say I'm going to find my favorite recliner for my afternoon nap, and I can't find it because there's papers on it and my dog is also on it. Well, I was supposed to sit there, and that was pretty much as I could process, and I don't know where to sit, so now I might start pacing because I'm really out of sorts, right? So making sure the environment, again, is clear and easy to distinguish different parts. At the individual level, right, we want to maintain those predictable routines and schedules for waking, meals, activities. This way we can put more brain power towards other cognitive processes throughout the day. Trying to be flexible with this routine around the person's biorhythms. So let's say they take a nap in the afternoon, they wake up around 3 or 4, and their brain has reset, which it sometimes does when we take a nap, and they think it's breakfast. My job is not to tell them it's 5 o'clock in 20 minutes and we're having dinner. My job is to make some breakfast, because our job is to help protect them and try and keep them in their reality. If I tell them it's dinner time and they think it's 8 o'clock in the morning, it's just going to really stress them out and give them a lot more frustration than is needed. And there's no harm in having breakfast in the afternoon, for example. Trying to limit daytime napping, as I mentioned, sometimes the brain goes into cleanup mode. It does reset occasionally, especially with brain deterioration. It doesn't really know what time we're waking up to, so it says, let's just start at the beginning of the day again. Limiting caffeine and sugar to the morning hours only, and limiting alcohol to reduce that risk of confusion. So a quick intro to the blood-brain barrier. Your brain can't store any sugars, but it only runs on sugar. So all day long, your body is sending your brain sugar that it receives first. Up to 60 to 70% of the sugar that we intake all day goes straight to the brain. So whether we're sending it Oreos, Frappuccino, or a happy hour margarita, again, that's going straight to the brain, and that's going to very much increase that already confused person in the middle of their sundowning in the afternoon. Additionally, we want to look for behavior patterns to identify what makes their symptoms better or worse. This is not foolproof, of course, but just looking and tracking for these does make a big difference. Lastly, distracting activities, redirecting to their favorite activities, foods, animals, and people. I also want to add clothing. So most of us have that favorite pair of pants. It just looks fabulous. I can gain a little weight, lose a little weight, doesn't matter. The pants are just great. I know if I wear them, they're going to fit well all day, and I'm going to be really comfortable and confident. Now, I also have in the very back of my closet a pair of pants that doesn't fit so well. And I hope I do enough laundry so that I don't ever have to use those, because I would be miserable all day long. I'd be pulling on them and just very uncomfortable. This is why a lot of times we see people who are having brain deterioration going for that outfit day after day. They're pulling out that same t-shirt with the red stripes on it, and we're thinking, they just wore this yesterday. It's dirty. I really need to wash this, right? So, and a really easy fix is to go and buy duplicates. So if the store is still open where you got it from, or if you can find something that's very similar, buying 3 or 4 of the same thing, again, there's no harm in them wearing the same shirt over and over if that's what they're comfortable in. And we know how that feels when we're in something that's not very comfortable to us. This way we have more than one, and we're able to continue washing and keeping their hygiene pretty clean. Okay, we're going to take a look real quick at some of the treatment options for sundowning. Of course, we want to try non-medication interventions first. Sometimes nighttime sedatives can have an effect to increase confusion or hasten decline. Light therapy is another treatment option. Exposure to fluorescent lamps or daylight sitting next to a window earlier in the morning does help to stimulate awareness during the regular times of the day. Lastly, or in the middle, regulating the sleep cycle and adjusting the sleep environment. I just learned recently that it's best to sleep around that 66, 67 degrees in a really pitch dark environment. And I've tried that, and I'm sleeping so much better. So try and make sure everything's nice and cold. Blankets are fine, but make sure it's very dark, and their body will actually tell itself, okay, time to sleep. Aromatherapy, for those of you who don't have as many allergies to scents as I do, this is very comforting, especially lavender, peppermint, orange blossom. There's a lot of them, and you can look them up pretty easily online. Physical activity. This one is one of my favorites to share. This story, when I was the social worker at our Encinitas community in northern San Diego, we had a resident, I'll call him Rudy. And Rudy was very young. He had early onset. He was in his late 50s. He had a daughter that was younger than me at the time, very heartbreaking. And he was pacing a lot, and especially in the afternoon. He just could not sit still. We couldn't get him to sit down for dinner or for any of the activities. But you could tell he was in pretty good shape, right? So I called his wife one day and I said, I'll call her name Ruth. Ruth, what does your husband do for exercise? And she said, oh, he used to run marathons, and he would do Ironmans in Hawaii and go all over and do these 100-mile bike rides. Okay, so now we have a different problem. This gentleman is used to getting all of his energy out in very large quantities at once. Well, even though we had a couple of acres on the Encinitas community property, it wasn't going to be enough because he was still walking around pacing. I thought, okay, Ironman, marathon, I can't run. I could swim. We had a 4.5-foot pool at the community. So I said, Ruth, can you just bring me a pair of his swim goggles? He hasn't swam in 8 years, Erin. How do you think he's going to? Don't worry. It's only 4.5 feet deep. I'll take him in. I used to be on a swim team. No problem. Okay, so she brought me the goggles. We went in the pool. It was great. Splashed around. All right, so if swimming is one of those activities, right, that doesn't get processed through the hippocampus, if it's a little bit more of a routine, it's like riding a bike, maybe we can still find that strength that he has. So there was a YMCA across the street, and we took Rudy over. I explained to the lifeguard who we were, what we were doing. He looked at me like I had 3 heads, and I got in the pool with him. And sorry, this always makes me choke up. He swam 17 laps straight through without stopping. Now, I'm a good swimmer. I could probably swim 3 to 5, and he swam 17 in a row. He stopped. He got out of the pool. You could tell he was so happy to have gotten his energy out. He was relaxed. And for the first time in 3 months, Rudy came back to the community and he sat down in our Mexican food club, and I have this image burned in my brain of him with this huge red sombrero on, just smashing up avocado to make guacamole and the biggest smile on his face, right? And that conversation that we would have needed to have pretty quickly with that psychiatrist to bring on some medications to slow him down a little bit so he wouldn't be a risk to himself or others. We didn't need to do it anymore. So he started going to the pool a couple of times a week for quite a few years, right? And that's about using their strengths. What are they really good at? You have somebody who's used to golfing. They could probably still do that. You have somebody who's used to cutting up vegetables with a knife. You're not going to give a 5-year-old a knife because they haven't learned how to do that. But somebody who's been cutting vegetables for 70 years, they can help you make soup in the afternoon, okay? Moving on, music therapy is always very comforting and engaging. Healing touch. There's new research out that says a 20-second hug can reduce your blood pressure as well as cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So if you have somebody you love and you're seeing them today and you feel comfortable enough, give them a 20-second hug, and also please hug your loved ones. It just makes a really big difference. And it just reminds us of that human entity of loving others. Medication treatments, again, you're going to check with your primary physician for these. Okay, so I mentioned we were going to talk about one of the treatments, so I'll go over this briefly. We did a USC Light study between USC and Silverado, so Dr. Kyle Konis and Dr. Ed Schneider from the USC Schools of Architecture and Gerontology. We did a controlled trial at 8 Silverado communities in Los Angeles area. I was the graduate researcher on the pilot study, so it was very exciting. And we assessed the effects of daylight on the mood and behaviors of those living with dementia in long-term memory care communities. Now, there's not a lot of studies on people who have dementia in long-term care communities. So not only that was fascinating, but this was, again, another non-pharmacological approach, an intervention that didn't involve any medications. We sat residents in a room with a particular level of daylight, and we sat some other residents in a room in the morning that did not have any daylight coming in, and we measured their depression levels before and a couple weeks after. And the research was extremely promising. It suggested that increased exposure to daylight really does reduce depression and improve mental health in those living with dementia, right? So something very easy, just scoot them a little closer to the window, maybe have breakfast outside on the patio in the morning. The key hours are kind of that 8 to 10 window. You can look more of this up online. Just type in USC Light Study, and you can look up Dr. Kyle Konis and Dr. Ed Schneider. It pops up right away on Google. I tried it yesterday, so. All right, so this is all nice and dandy, but what if we're already in the moment? How do we handle sundowning once it's already occurred or occurring? This is pretty cliche, but the best thing we can do is to stay calm, right? Everybody feeds off other people's energy. If you're miserable, they will continue to exude that as well. So staying calm, not raising our voice, not touching them unexpectedly. Don't come up behind somebody who's sundowning and tap them on the shoulder and ask them what's wrong. We want to come around in front of them, get down at their level. If they're seated, look them in the eyes, maybe hold their hand and say, how can I help you, right? It needs to be a really direct connection so that we don't startle them. Also, this should be pretty obvious, but we do not want to just restrain or disagree or belittle their source of anxiety or stress, because to them, this is their reality right now. If they are pacing, clear a path for them to walk, they just need to get some energy out, that's okay. You can also ask them, what can I help you find? Maybe we can get to that goal a little quicker. Again, avoiding arguing or asking for an explanation or rationalizing. Remember, the brain deterioration is a complete inability to change how they're feeling, how they're thinking in that moment. Some of the helpful tips to try: keeping the area well lit, close the curtains so the transition from light to dark can't be seen. Maybe we turn on some soothing music. Music is great. Music memory, to be honest, is one of the last parts of the brain to go. So especially the songs between the ages, our own personal ages of 12 to 25, that's the music that most resonates with those who are experiencing memory decline. A few years ago, Silverado partnered with Northwestern University. They have a cognitive neurology and Alzheimer's disease center, and they studied the effects of music on mood and cognition, depression, agitation, and had, again, found out a very wonderful non-pharmacological approach that music really does benefit someone who's sundowning, which is why in our communities, we do a lot of our music live or otherwise in the afternoon. We have drum circles. It's all about catering to help that comfort level. If I'm hearing a song from my childhood, it brings me back to that place where I was extremely happy. I had no worries, and it just brings a lot of joy. Introducing new activities that are distracting, such as folding napkins, again, whatever they like to do, validating their concerns, listening calmly to their confusion, trying to discover the cause of their behavior. Another quick story I'll share, at Encinitas community, when I was there as a social worker, there was a gentleman, let's call him George, and George would sundown every day around 2 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and he always tried and go somewhere. He was always trying to elope, didn't have enough strength to climb the fence, but one day we actually did find him digging under the fence. He had gotten his leg stuck. Very sad. We had to call the nurse real quick. He had a couple scratches, nothing major. But I sat down with him on the pavement outside in the patio, and I said, George, what's outside here that you can't get in here right now? Help me help you get what you need. And he looked at me and he stared me straight in the face and he said, my glasses are broken and you don't have an eye doctor here and I need to go get my glasses fixed. Right? So if that's not a lesson in humility and trying to validate somebody and what's really a concern for them, we got his glasses fixed and we solved the problem pretty quickly. It's not always going to be that easy, but you have to start somewhere. Offering their favorite food, activity, holding their pet or a book, right? Asking, why are you sad? When we're sad, if I go tell a friend that I'm sad, I'm not expecting my friend to say, oh, you're going to be fine. It's okay. Just have some ice cream here, right? We're going to actually sit down with them and say, I'm so sorry. Tell me more. Tell me why you're feeling sad, right? This is what we would just do with anybody. Taking care of yourself. This is a difficult one, right? We give of ourselves. We've made that commitment to take care of our families, and this often brings a lot of stress on ourselves if we are one of those informal caregivers at home with somebody experiencing dementia, right? So finding little ways to de-stress throughout the day as their fatigue builds up. Ours might as well, and a lot of it, again, comes back to body language and communication and tone. For those of us in the professional world of senior care residences or hospitals, some of the environments we can change at where we work to help, minimizing those shift changes that are pretty noisy, right? AM shifts could be leaving, PM shifts coming on, they get to say hi to their friends. Normally this happens out on the floor, and this can be if it's around the 2, 3 o'clock time, it's very noisy. So perhaps taking that off the floor to a break room. Reducing noise and disturbances is night. We're checking in on them overnight to see if they need anything, assistance to the restroom. We might want to invest in some white noises, right? Because if I'm at home by myself and I'm sleeping and I hear a noise, it's going to startle me really quickly and I'm going to be very scared and trying to figure out what's going on. The same thing occurs. Just because they're with us doesn't mean they know that they're safe all the time after they immediately wake up. Providing those familiar belongings or music, again, to help provide comfort and reduce disorientation. And if you haven't read Dr. Al Power's book, Dementia Beyond Disease, I highly recommend it. You can find it on Amazon. And a quote from there is, a senior community has all but eliminated so-called sundowning for over a decade by putting an end to this late day commotion and instituting a policy of rest as needed that listens to their individual rhythm, right? So if I'm at a care community and I have a new person moving in, this person has taken showers in the AM at 8 o'clock every day for the past 50 years. Well, I'm sorry, but our care team only has time to shower them at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This is not going to go very well, right? We want to ask them what their needs are. We want to ask their families what's their normal routine. We don't want them to fit into a box that we have. Our role is to adjust our care to the individual because most likely they already have very strong routines and habits in place. We also want to enter their reality. As I mentioned, this concept of therapeutic retelling. Some people might call it therapeutic lying. I don't want you to think of it as that. I want you to think of this not being dishonest, but we are protecting their view of the world. If they're reliving the past, if they think their children are small and they're lost, it's important for us to help them find them or to help validate, right? Instead of convincing them their children are 50 and 60, we might want to think about it. Okay, it's August, it's summertime. Well, maybe we could tell them the kids are outdoors and they're playing with their friends and they'll be back later, right? We'll get through that sundowning period, right? We want to validate how they're feeling. It's really important. If they're repeating memories, additionally, if this is the same thing every day, don't get frustrated. Any of the memories that they're repeating are still intact. So I should be very happy to hear the same memory over and over again about grandma's farm or grandpa working in the steel mill, because those are the memories that are still working, and I'm providing value to them by telling me something and providing me with some wisdom and experience as well. Lastly, we're going to ensure their individual needs are met, right? Occupying person's time with structured activities during the difficult times of the day. If I like to do sewing, but they don't, it's not a time for sewing in the afternoon for them. Maybe they prefer bingo or gardening, right? We want to see what they enjoy, what activities they enjoy, and perhaps have them nap during activities they're not so fond of. That's okay too. Making sure they're wearing their hearing aids and glasses. This is kind of the bane of our existence, right? At senior care communities, they're always getting lost. Hearing aids, the sundowning part of the afternoon, very most likely, again, as we mentioned, sensory overload means I'm probably going to take my hearing aids out because I don't want to hear as much. So if you know Mrs. Smith every day at 3 o'clock takes out her hearing aids, that's a great time for our care team to go in and say, Mrs. Smith, can I put your hearing aids back in the case for you? This way we can keep track of them. They don't go into a pocket and a napkin and right through the wash, and we'll have to pay for them again. Glasses, very quickly, zenni.com, zenni.com. You can get glasses. These are actually from there. They're about $6. I can add any prescription I want. I could be as blind as I want, or I can make it very clear. And you can have them shipped here in about a week or two. Ask families to purchase multiples. I have 8 glasses at home. Right now, I probably know where 2 of them are, right? So this is just a common occurrence. We need to have extra glasses around. Don't expect them coming in with 1 glasses that pair is going to stay too long. Ensuring residents stay hydrated and well fed. Yes, we prefer if they sit down in a dining room, but there's nothing that says we can't walk around with them and give them food along the way, like a sandwich to hold and eat, or a meatball and raviolis to hold instead of pasta. Right? It's really important to keep them hydrated and with enough nutrition. We don't want them to miss meals. And additionally, avoiding medications that cause confusion. Nurses and physicians can keep a really close eye on that as well. Okay, so we're at our last slide here. So just wanted to share some additional resources of those of us who work alongside Alzheimer's Orange County in the area who can also provide education. UCI Mind is one of the 30 ADRCs, or Alzheimer's Disease Research Centers. They are nationally and they're funded by NIH, and they can provide fantastic research. You can participate in the research as well. They have lectures that you can attend, so you can look them up online very easily as well. And lastly, our Silverado communities have a great support group. You can call or email us anytime. My email is provided here, my first initial E and my last name, Light, like a light bulb. And our Newport Mesa community has a support group every 3rd Wednesday of the month from 1 to 2 p.m. You do not have to have a relative or somebody living here. You can just join us. Additionally, we have a nationwide general public dementia support group. This is the first Tuesday of every month from 11 to 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. This is a great place to come and just get some extra information, share what you're going through. The next one's on September 1st. I am hosting it. We are going to be reviewing caregiver stress. And so if this is something you're interested in, if you're living at home with somebody who is experiencing this decline, you don't want to miss this. again. And thank you so much to Alzheimer's Orange County. It's been a privilege to spend this time with all of you, and just wanted to also thank all those in healthcare right now, all of our essential workers working so hard to provide such quality of life. To those of you at home, we'll keep you in our thoughts and prayers, and please feel free to reach out anytime. Be happy to provide you with resources and the support that you need to help your loved one as well. So thank you very much.
Erin, that was just outstanding, and we thank you so much. It was an excellent presentation. And I just want to check in real quickly now with all of our attendees. We are just about at 12:30 now, but we are going to have a question and answer dialogue for about 10 minutes. Erin has agreed to stay. If you have to leave and you've been on for 60 minutes, you can feel free to leave. But we encourage you to stay. We're going to try and get to some of the questions. Erin, as she mentioned, is making her email available there. If we don't get to your questions, you can reach out to her. The evaluation that I mentioned earlier won't pop up on your screen until we leave the webinar. So if you leave now, you'll receive it in your email. We do need those returned within 24 hours. So before we go to the Q&A, let me thank our sponsors once again, our wonderful sponsors, O'Connor Mortuary, Caring Companions at Home, Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, and Alzheimer's Orange County. And of course, we want to thank Silverado Senior Living for lending us the fabulous Erin light for our presentation today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up the question box. Let me just undock that so I can see what I'm doing here. One question is, when can you differentiate possible bladder infections versus sundowning is a question that we have.
In general, and I can't speak for all people experiencing UTIs, there's a pretty noticeable difference. So whatever their baseline's at, you might notice them become more sleepy and more lethargic, or all of a sudden their behavior changes and they're more agitated. You can't really be sure. In general, I've asked physicians, why do so many people who are older have a higher propensity for UTIs? And they said, our body, as we age, doesn't have the ability to flush out all of the bacteria. So most older adults over 70 and 80 have a small portion of that bacteria that just kind of recycles in our system, which is why it's so prominent and it recurs so often. Some people are on a routine antibiotic, but in general, it's looking for those small changes, and you'll know after your loved one's had one, unfortunately, what exactly that looks like. So hopefully that helps to answer it a bit.
Okay, thank you, Erin. And then another attendee is asking for that address again, and I want to put it in the chat box. Is it zenni.com?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just put it in the chat box for everyone.
I just ordered glasses
Christine
last
wants
week
to know.
and I got them in.
Yeah, I want to use it too. That
They're
sounds
great.
wonderful. Both of your groups, your support groups, are via Zoom?
Yes. Yes, they are. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All of the communities, all Silverado communities have a monthly Zoom meeting. So if you want to attend one that's closer to your location, just email me and I will connect you with their social worker who runs the meetings. Be happy to.
Okay, and then here's a question from Susanna. My mother experiences much anxiety in the evenings and we are leaving a nightlight on in the bedroom. Should we turn it off? And actually, I wanted to ask about this too. The issue of making it real dark in the bedroom, because that kind of scared me a little bit. When I was caregiving, my lady would wake up in the middle of the night and often be confused about where she was. So the nightlight kind of reassured her. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think it can go either way. It's if there's somebody who does get up very frequently during the night to use the restroom, and if they're going to be getting up to go to the restroom without help, if they, if you're in the other room and you're not going to hear them, absolutely, I would keep some of the pathway lighted for sure.
Okay.
So.
So it's kind of stage dependent, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And it's depends on the individual and where they are in the
If there's
illness.
somebody who can hold their bladder and their bowels the whole night long, and they are just getting woken up by a bird outside their window or you shuffling down the hallway, sometimes as we age, occasionally we get really sensitive, high-pitched hearing, and so that would be the time at which you would want to make sure everything's nice and dark and cool and quiet.
Okay. Thank you. Um, what about techniques for assessing pain in an individual with dementia?
I wish my head nurse was here. She could answer
Yeah.
this a lot better than me. In general, for pain, you want to look for at least, at the very minimum, nonverbal cues. So facial grimacing, furrowed brows, clenched hands, just tightening up in general. Again, pushing away can be a sign of pain if you're touching a certain part of their body. They could be very aggressive hitting. So, for example, if you have somebody who's walking, and if I have dementia and all of a sudden my back hurts, I get this stabbing pain in my back, I might turn around and to look at who hit me. My brain might not be able to process that it's actually just a really angry nerve versus somebody else. And I might become more combative with somebody who really didn't do anything around me.
Excellent. How would you suggest therapeutic retelling and not disagreeing with auditory hallucinations that result in police calls?
Police calls are different. So police calls, I would suggest getting a psychiatrist, neurologist, or physician on board. That's a heavier conversation. That means that there's a level of paranoia and fear involved. We call the police when we feel unsafe and when there's a really dire emergency. So that level and fear of panic that I mentioned when we lose our children or if we're really stressed out, that's what they're experiencing. So that needs to be addressed first. So if they're just sundowning a little bit and if they're hallucinating, it's okay. You have to think about what is the worst that's going to happen in this situation. If the worst that's going to happen is they think there's a cat in the corner and they're talking to it, okay, it's not harming themselves, it's not harming others. We might want to ask what the cat's name is and just kind of continue on. It's not really too big of a deal that's going to affect their life or their safety or yours. However, if it's something that is more drastic that needs to be attended to like that, that means that there is something internally going on that they can't talk themselves down from.
Right. Good. Thank you, Erin. The next one is I notice exit seeking occurring when residents sundown. How do I address helping the one person while still leading activities for the remainder of the residents? The behavior disturbs the entire group. I've tried validation, various activities like folding, but they just keep insisting and start hollering out that they need to leave. They want to go home. They're calling the cops, etc. What I
Yeah.
feel is really needed is one-on-one, like taking a walk or just talking. But I just can't attend to someone one-on-one when I have 9 in the room. Unfortunately, the caregiver, sorry, this is long.
It's okay.
Unfortunately, the caregivers don't come once the residents are put into the activity room, no matter how many times they're called. I've tried having the sundowner sit with the receptionist, but was told I need to keep her in the room. So this is a problem I'm sure that happens in a lot of communities. Someone needs a one-on-one and you're trying to do the group activities. Any suggestions, Erin? That's a
All those
tough one.
techniques that we mentioned, right? That music therapy really does wonders. We've had people in that very same situation, and if we put on their favorite music, all of a sudden, and we bring in one of the younger leadership teams, like myself or another lady, they're willing to dance. They're ready to go and boogie and teach us whatever they know much better than us. And so that redirection, those techniques that we talked about, the music and the calming therapy, aromatherapy. If you tried all those, I heard at one community of our Silverado, they put a television show At the same time every day, very similar. The resident always tried to leave. They actually put a TV in the lobby and a chair, and it would actually distract this person from leaving because he would watch his favorite show, like I Love Lucy or MASH or one of the oldie goodies. If you've already kind of gone through that, this is a discussion for whoever's in charge. All right, this could be the head nurse or an administrator. This needs to be a bigger discussion than you, because your resources are very limited and it's actually hindering the group to have one person just kind of be that outlier, because you're actually having to stop activities to assist them. And that place, wherever they're at with you, is not the right fit for them. It's probably going over their head. They probably can't track what's going on in the group. They can't participate and they're feeling uncomfortable. So they're like, I gotta go. I gotta split. This isn't helpful. I don't know what's going on. I'm not supposed to be here. I need to leave. So.
Yep, that's hard. Thank you, Erin. I'm looking at our time, and I think we need to go ahead and end. Thinking about your time, Erin, you've been so generous with it. Again, we thank you so much for being here, and I want to let you all know that next month's webinar, the topic is Parkinson's disease and its effect on cognition. And we hope to see all of you back here on September 15th. Our speaker is Donna Sperlakis, and she is the Director of Community Engagement at the Parkinson's Foundation. And so I think that'll be a really interesting topic for us to explore as well. So once again, we thank our speaker, Erin Light. We thank our sponsors, and we thank all of you, our viewers. Be sure and turn your evaluations in. And everyone have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye. Thank you for having me. Take care, everybody.